Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. If you had them over, they would eat up all your food. It's time for therapy dudes.
Hello, hello. This is Therapy Dudes. I'm Dan Fox. Noticeably absent is my better half, my work husband, Andre Karkamaz. I miss him dearly. He will be back for the next podcast, but today I'm flying solo once again. Today we're talking about DBT skills. This is the second part of a two-part summary of CBT and DBT skills. And we'll get into it in a second. First, I want to shout out Boulder Psychological Services. This is a great resource. You can check them out at boulderpsychologicalservices.com for all of your therapy needs. Historically, it's useful to know that like DBT, which stands for Dialectical Behavioral or Behavior Therapy, came after CBT. It was kind of the next generation of how to apply the CBT tools and strategies. And it went a little farther into thinking about sets of skills. There's four categories or domains of skills that DBT tends to focus on. Often they're seen as skills that are more interpersonal and skills that are more intrapersonal within ourselves. So the interpersonal skill set that is clearly in that category is about interpersonal effectiveness. And this is about how to kind of tend to ourselves and to the relationship as we're interacting with other people. So there's a lot of details that we'll get into with that one. On the other extreme, mindfulness is an intrapersonal skill, something that we do within our own self, trying to stay in the here and now and in our sensory world instead of just hyper-conceptualizing and being sort of like disembodied and thinking about the past or future or imagining different scenarios of conversations or experiences that we might have or that we regret having or that we're going to have later in terms of, I don't know, some conflict that we're trying to manage. Mindfulness is about just trying to stay, centered and present in the here and now. The other two skills are distress tolerance and emotional regulation. And these have components that are both interpersonal and intrapersonal. Distress tolerance is kind of a more extreme situation. It's like a subset of emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is very much about the kind of behavioral skills that are from that kind of generation of thinking, where we're trying to understand and imagine and manage our emotions, right? The self-awareness and self-management that we talked about last time. Distress tolerance is specifically about having a toolkit for crises that are coming up. They may be crises that are just generated by our own anxiety or mood. They may be crises that are coming at us from the environment, and we're trying to figure out how to work with those and not accidentally make things worse because we're in distress. So I think it's best to start with the inner stuff, start with mindfulness, and then get into the two skills that kind of work on both the emotional regulation, the distress tolerance, and then we'll look finally at the interpersonal effectiveness skills. So there's a lot of information out there about mindfulness, a lot of different practices. What we're trying to do is to be more of a neutral observer of what's going on with our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and behaviors. So those CBT categories that we learned last time, we're just trying to pay attention to them. Um, we're trying to put that into words about, I feel this way, or I'm noticing that, this is happening in my body or in my mind. If we notice that we're kind of spinning out conceptually, there's a tool called 54321, and I'm going to get the sensory order wrong, but it's about being aware of 5 things that we see, 4 things that we hear, 3 things that we feel, 2 things that we taste, 1 thing that we smell. We don't need to, exhaustively fill in each one of those, but taking some time to dwell on our sensory experience can bring us away from that hyper conceptualizing, that disembodied state, back to the here and now, right? We're trying to be here and now in an embodied way. Often, a useful tool here is to notice if our mind is kind of judging things as good or bad. People in our environment, things in our environment, things in our mind, stories that we have about what's going on currently. Our adult brain becomes extremely judgmental. And once we judge something as positive or negative, it's usually from a self-referential perspective, right? Positive or negative for our own kind of security or ego benefit. We end up getting into that sort of conceptualized experience instead of being here and now in a sensory way. We're just sort of cogitating about how to manage the judgment that we just made. So recognizing judgments and letting them go is a great way to work with mindfulness. And some of those breathing techniques that we talked about in the last podcast can also be great in terms of kind of recentering ourselves into the present moment. Let's get into emotional regulation skills. So a lot of this was discussed last time in terms of how we break down an emotional experience from the CBT perspective into thoughts, feelings, which include sensations, and behaviors. DBT goes further. It's looking into things like, what do we do to take care of our body? There's an acronym, PLEASE, where the P stands for our physical well-being, how we're taking care of our body. The L is just thrown in there to make it please instead of peas. Um, E stands for eating, right? What kind of nutrition are we putting into our body? What kind of fuel are we putting into our body? Are we eating enough? Are we eating at the right times? I would say drinking water kind of falls into that category too, lots of water. The A is avoiding substances. S has to do with sleep and making sure that we're sleeping regularly and enough. If we go to bed and wake up around the same time each day, we're more in touch with our circadian rhythms. Our brain knows when to do that deep dive into deep sleep. Our brain knows when to kind of get our body ready to be active in the morning if we're getting to bed and waking up at a consistent time. E stands for exercise, and moving our body is incredibly useful to reduce anxiety, reduce mood issues, depression, and to just kind of synchronize us more in the here and now. Exercise by itself can be a major change in terms of our anxiety or depression. I've often had people that have anxiety or depressive disorders who are either wanting to get off medication or having medication recommended to them and they don't want to do it. And they will say, what's the alternative? And in a nutshell, to me, the alternative, and what I often suggest is that they do each day for at least a half hour, some physical exercise, and also each day for at least a half hour, some kind of CBT or DBT skills practice, journaling, rehearsing the next day, reviewing the previous day, setting some intentions about how they want to manage things that are coming up, noticing emotional experiences that have been difficult and trying to use their CBT skills to brainstorm different ways to handle it. So if somebody puts in a half hour daily of physical care and a half hour daily of mental fitness strategies, often that does the trick. Uh, I once gave that recommendation to somebody and they go, "Oh, that sounds like a lot of work. I guess I'll take the med." And to each their own. But managing depression and anxiety, the research shows that a combination of therapy and medication is the most effective, as opposed to just the medication, right? And that, you know, category of doing our own mental fitness, that could kind of be seen as the self-therapy if somebody's going towards optimal self-care. Somehow exercise missed that in the research, but I would include that for, peak well-being. Um, Other emotional regulation skills have to do with, really questioning our thoughts that come up. So holding them up to that cognitive distortion, um, clarification that we talked about last podcast, where we're trying to see if we're thinking realistically, if, it stands up to the light of day in our cool reasoning. Um, but there's also some proactive things around identifying the activities, the social experiences, the hobbies that we have that we enjoy doing and making them a priority so that our cup is full, right? Our tank is full, so to speak. Um, there's a ABC that they use here, where the A stands for accumulating these positive experiences. The B stands for building expertise. So we're trying to do something each day that gives us a sense of competence or accomplishment. So learning a new skill, learning a musical instrument, cooking, physical activity, trying a new sport, get out there and do some pickleball. All that stuff counts. And the C stands for coping ahead. So this is that idea of rehearsing what might be coming down the road and figuring out how we're going to handle a tricky situation. Um, if we move on from emotional regulation skills to the specific subcategory of that, which is our distress tolerance skills, when we're in a crisis, there's not a lot of things that we can do in those situations that will be helpful unless we've thought about them in advance. Usually, when we're this distressed, our body is in fight or flight, and we are no longer able to access our sort of smart, logical thinking skills, our executive functioning skills, our communication skills, our interpersonal skills. These things are all compromised because our brain is getting starved for blood and oxygen. Those resources are getting deployed to our muscles so that we can fight or flee whatever it is that has been extremely distressing and kind of gotten us into that fight or flight response to begin with. So that TIP acronym, temperature, intense bursts of exercise, paced breathing, and progressive relaxation, that's a good one. Um, Self-soothing with, sensory awareness is a good one. Oftentimes I will I'll tell myself to like look for different colors. I'll go through the rainbow and just notice what's red, notice what's orange, what's yellow, etc. Just having a script of sensory-based things to do and having practiced it a bunch of times makes that tool more useful and more likely to actually help us to calm down. When our nervous system is activated, when we have that adrenaline running through our system, if we were to be able to snap our fingers and go to our most relaxed, happy place, it would take about 2 to 3 minutes for our nervous system to calm down and that adrenaline to kind of run its course. So we're looking for a way to get a couple of minutes where we can really just kind of give ourselves permission to settle down so that we get our mind back. We're not in that fight or flight response. We're centered. We're in the here and now. Um, there's a tool called radical acceptance, which is a practice that, will get more effective over time, where we keep trying to let ourselves feel the feeling that, this is fundamentally okay. Um, this is a temporary situation. It's going to pass. I've dealt with hard things before. There's a lot of, key messages we can tell ourselves to be able to, rather than just be reactive and distressed and wildly thinking, we can hone back in on our key messages and be more accepting. Um, if you don't have a tool, you should brainstorm it, either from what I talked about or Google online, different distress tolerance skills, and start to practice one. Start to practice it when you're just mildly distressed. You want to get it in your bones. It is a skill. We want to have some muscle memory for that skill so that when we are in crisis, we have half a chance of being able to apply that skill in a way that's going to make a meaningful difference. The last category of um, skills or the domains that are in DBT is interpersonal effectiveness skills. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but DBT, by the way, um, means, right, the dialectical piece is the the part that is kind of a little confusing, but that's about this idea that we're trying to take these opposing things, which is, often this opposing idea that we want to accept what's going on, right? To just kind of be in a place of peace and acceptance with whatever the experience is, and also work to change it. So um, there's an even further approach to therapy called ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, which is very much about that dialectical opposition of acceptance and commitment or change. Um, and the idea of DBT is to be working both of those. And the behavior part is just, you know, learning and practicing these new skills to replace whatever was maladaptive in our um, kind of knee-jerk habitual behaviors or thoughts or feelings in the past. Okay, back to um, our interpersonal effectiveness skills. This is all about trying to respect ourselves and others when we're interacting with people. So there's a couple of acronyms that DBT uses. One of them is about being able to ask for what we need or want, and also to be able to say yes or, more importantly, no to other people's requests. And the acronym Dear Man stands for 7 different things that we want to be paying attention to when we're um, trying to, understand and ask for what we want or find the ability to say no. Um, so the D is describe, right? Describe what it is that we're needing or wanting or not wanting if there's a request. E is to express what's going on. A is to assert ourselves, right? To be willing to speak up and uh, feel okay that we have, feelings. We don't need to be always people pleasing. We don't need to always say yes to somebody's request. R is to just reinforce whatever it is that we've been describing, expressing, and asserting. The man part, M is to be mindful, right? To stay in the present and to be able to try to like work with our sensory experiences and not get caught up spinning, overthinking, imagining what this person's thinking of us, imagining different iterations of how a conflicted argument might play out. Um, A is about just trying to appear centered and confident. And N is to remember that this is a negotiation, right? When we're having these discussions with people, often we're trying to resolve something, and there is a little bit of a give and take, and we want to be able to understand what it is that we can let go of and what is really core to our well-being and our sense of what we need to do to respect ourselves and also the other person in the situation. Um, Dear Man is mostly about self. The next acronym, GIVE, is about um, others, and this is about our sort of tone or our way of expressing or what we're expressing. The G stands for gentle, being gentle, right? Being kind. I is interest, showing interest, being interested, being curious. V is validating, right? We don't have to validate the truth of what they're saying. We just want to validate their experience and their emotions, even if we don't agree with it. And E is just keeping an easy manner about ourselves, being conscious that we're not getting agitated or escalated, and then doing some self-care, self-soothing tool that we've practiced to regulate, a difficult emotion that's coming up. Um, a lot of times, the interpersonal effectiveness is going to come from rehearsing ahead of time a conversation that we know is going to be conflictual. We want to really understand our priorities, what's going to be important to us, how to respect ourselves, how to respect the relationship, what's negotiable, what are the sticking points that are likely to come up, and not only rehearse the contents of what's coming up, but also what we imagine our emotional state to be like, and just kind of practice visualizing how we want to be in that situation. So those 4 categories are kind of taking the initial CBT strategies and putting them into play in these experiences that really get in our way in our daily life if we don't have any real plan for them. And just like those CBT skills, which are working with emotions, this is working with, more specifically different kinds of skill sets and sort of priorities for how to navigate our life in a way that is skillful. This stuff needs to be practiced. It needs to be workshopped. We want to be actually making an effort to manage it. A lot of people will, spend a whole lot of time thinking about things like the grocery store and what they need to shop for, or, managing their yard and landscaping and how to organize that. But we often just completely ignore our inner world and how to have some self-awareness and self-management around our emotions and our behaviors. So this is really about recognizing that mental health is really about mental fitness practices. Mental health isn't sort of a fixed state where we either have it or we don't. It's more similar to the idea of physical health, right? We're physically healthy based on habits and practices that we do for exercise or diet. And likewise, with mental health, we're healthier when we're aware of the practices and the habits that we need to have to help us feel mentally fit, and also aware of the bad habits that we want to be avoiding. So I hope this was helpful. Like, subscribe, comment. Our dear friend Andre will be back next time. I'm really looking forward to that. And I hope that you have a great time practicing this stuff and developing your own tools.
Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. If you had them over, they would eat up all your food. It's time for therapy dudes. Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. Listen to them anytime you're coming unglued.